The movie begins at the National Opera House in Hamburg, Germany, where an orchestra is preparing for a rehearsal. Little do they know, a group of armed thugs is sneaking in. Since no one in the orchestra is aware of the danger, the criminals spread out unnoticed. Soon, the thugs barge in, firing shots into the air. Meanwhile, JN and his rescue team are already on the scene. He gives his final orders to the squad just as the gang broadcasts a live announcement, declaring they've taken over the opera house and are demanding a $300 million ransom. "All you have to do is help us meet our goal of $300 million, the gang leader says. JN warns his team to hold their fire until he gives the word. However, the gang leader grabs a woman and shoots her on the spot, forcing Mato to defy JN's orders and fire at the thugs. JN quickly orders the team to engage, and soon, a fierce shootout ensues. The squad manages to take down most of the criminals. Once the dust settles, JN confronts Mato for disobeying orders. "I gave you the order, you're going to get us all killed." But it becomes clear that Mato has been shot, and the situation is dire. Suddenly, a thug disguised as a hostage springs to life. "No, you haven't saved anybody. I'm just going to blow up this place." Mato takes him out, but tragically, JN is hit and killed. Mato's split-second decision costs JN his life. 5 years later, we find Mato in Romania, retired from special forces and living in a small town called Assam Mill. Despite leaving his old life behind, JN's death still haunts him. Mato looks at a photo, remembering the good times with JN's family. On payday, he announces his intention to retire for good. He buys a ticket to Bucharest and climbs into his van, ready to leave. Meanwhile, in Amsterdam, an Interpol team led by Shira successfully intercepts a shipment of drugs, dealing a significant blow to various mafia organizations. One mob boss reports to Sabin, the head of the cartel, about the seizure. As it turns out, one of the captured criminals was an undercover Interpol agent who assisted in the bust. Shira tells the agent they need to apply more pressure because their ultimate goal is to capture the mafia leaders. "But I want the whole association, not just drops," she says. When Mato arrives in Amsterdam, we meet Paul, a businessman deeply involved in cryptocurrency. At the same time, Mato nervously stands at Helen's door. After a moment of hesitation, he knocks. Helen's daughter Angie answers, and Mato asks her to get her mother. When Helen appears, she is shocked to see him. She invites him inside for coffee, clearly still processing his sudden appearance. Once inside, Mato learns that Helen is now married to Paul. Burdened with guilt, Mato apologizes and admits that JN's death was his fault. He tries to explain what happened, but Helen refuses to hear it. "It should have been me," Mato says. "Shut up." Helen snaps, furious that he has come back after all these years, dredging up pain she worked hard to move on from. "You couldn't even be bothered to show up for his funeral. What kind of brother does that?" After an awkward apology, Mato leaves. However, Helen sees him standing outside the house, looking crushed. Feeling a pang of guilt, she invites him to stay in the guest room until he figures out his next steps. Mato accepts. Later, Helen shows him some of JN's belongings that she had kept for no particular reason. She tells Mato he should have them. Meanwhile, Sabin discusses their current situation and the stolen cargo. His crew realizes there's a mole among them, and decides not to continue business until they find the traitor. Back at the house, Paul notices Mato and Angie spending time together. Helen tells Paul that Mato was JN's friend and will be staying with them for a while. That evening, Mato sits outside, lost in thought. He reflects on his time with JN back in Afghanistan, where they had bonded over stories about their families. Angie tells her mom that she's really starting to like Mato. "I think he needs a new friend," she says. Paul, meanwhile, expresses concern about Mato's emotional state. Helen reassures him, saying he doesn't need to worry. The next morning, Mato finds a note from Angie asking him not to leave without saying goodbye. He goes for a run, and on his way back, spots Helen and Angie heading to school. Helen asks Mato to look after her dog while she's at work. Meanwhile, Sabin confronts Paul about $15 million missing from his account. Paul tries to explain that the cryptocurrency market is volatile but promises to fix the situation. As Sabin leaves, we see Interpol's undercover agents tailing him. Feeling burnt out, Matteo spends the day working before Helen invites him to go on a hike. He starts building a treehouse for Angie, hoping to keep his mind busy. Later, a worried Paul comes home. When Helen asks him what's wrong, he only mentions some accounting issues, without revealing anything about Sabin. Elsewhere, a group of tourists on a boat stumbles upon a horrifying sight: a body hanging from a bridge. It turns out to be an inside job. One of Sabin's men discovered the victim was working with Interpol and killed him. When Shira and her partner arrive at the scene, they immediately recognize the victim as one of their informants. Back at his office, Paul watches the news of a cryptocurrency collapse. Just then, Paul gets a call from Sabin demanding his money back. With only one day left, Paul promises to fix the situation. Sabin, however, doesn't bother yelling. He sends men to handle the problem instead. Shira and her partner realize the thugs are sending a message, but the victim's phone is too damaged to unlock via facial recognition. Meanwhile, Angie teases Matteo about his scar and hugs him tightly. Helen notices the bond forming between them. That night is family pizza night, but Paul calls to say he won't make it because of urgent business. While they eat outside, Angie gives Matteo a drawing, and Helen asks him to stay a little longer for Angie's sake. Out of nowhere, 4 masked men armed with baseball bats ambush Matteo. Angie runs, not to escape but to protect Matteo. One thug targets her, but he pays for his cruelty. However, the attack was a distraction. Angie is the real target. Matteo pulls himself up and steals a bike, pedaling furiously after the kidnappers. Helen borrows a phone and calls Paul, telling him Angie's been kidnapped. Paul immediately realizes what's going on and tries calling Sabin for help, but Sabin hangs up. The chase continues until the vehicle crashes. Matteo wakes up in a hospital, handcuffed to the bed. Outside, Helen is shouting at a police officer, and Angie is still missing. Shira and her partner take over the case. Matteo, still cuffed, is now suspected of being involved in Angie's kidnapping because the men he fought worked for Sabin. She fills him in on Sabin and other gangs possibly connected to the case. Based on their investigation, the kidnapping seems personal. When they question Helen and Paul, Paul remains suspiciously silent. Meanwhile, Sabin grows anxious as there's no word from his men. Angie, being held at Sabin's club, overhears Sabin planning to sell her to an international crime syndicate, the Ties family. Matteo reflects on the drawing Angie gave him and remembers John asking him to be her godfather. Driven by this promise, Matteo gathers tools for the rescue. Paul shows up to warn Matteo but accidentally lets slip Sabin's connection to the Ties family. Realizing Paul knows more than he's letting on, Matteo confronts him. Where is she? Matteo forces Paul to call Sabin, pretending he has the money for a trade. Sabin agrees to meet at a construction site. Before heading out, Matteo assures Helen he'll bring Angie home. At the construction site, Matteo demands Angie's release. However, the thugs reveal it's a setup. Angie isn't there. The thugs take Matteo's bag, but inside is a bomb. The explosion injures several thugs, sending the rest running. Back at the house, one of Sabin's men confronts Helen. A fight breaks out, and Helen manages to scare him off by firing a gun. Matteo captures one of the injured thugs and tortures him for Angie's location. Initially resistant, the thug eventually gives up the hideout. Meanwhile, Paul tries to flee but is ambushed and killed by Sabin's men. Shira arrives just as the thugs flee. Matteo contacts her, urging her to bring backup for Angie's rescue. At Sabin's club, Matteo engages in a brutal shootout. Shira and her team join the fight, escalating the chaos. Sabin flees with Angie, leaving his men behind to slow Matteo down. Matteo eventually catches up to Sabin, who warns him to back off or Angie dies. In a split second, Matteo throws a knife into Sabin's chest. Angie runs into Matteo's arms. 6 months later, Angie and Helen are together, unsure if Matteo will ever return. Meanwhile, Matteo sails alone at sea. Shira's partner receives an honorary medal, and Shira reminds him, "We still have more work to do." The film ends here. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next video.